Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Steph, and if you're new here, I'm Steph. So today we are finally talking about my best books of 2022. I have, I think, exactly 10. It might be 11. You'll see why. The first 4 are literally in no particular order. I could interchange these and be happy with where they landed on the list. But the last 6 are actually like in order of my favorites. I wouldn't switch these around. I did a bunch of switching before I actually settled on this list, but I'm gonna start out with the one that I've read most recently, I guess, this year that made it onto my favorites. And this one is quite a shock to me, and it is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. So I went into this not really thinking that I would love it. I thought that I would like it. I give Silvia Moreno-Garcia an average of 3 stars. You probably know this. She's ended up on like every single list that I've made for 2022. I gave this 4.5 stars. I loved it. The thing about The Beautiful Ones is this is a Regency romance. It's a historical fiction. It has a lot of buzzwords in it that are like not for me, I thought. And then I started reading this and realizing that just like the drama of it all was really sucking me in. And I finished this book, I think, in like 2 days. I felt really bad. I was buddy reading this with Daryan and I was like, I'm done. I finished it last night. I'm gonna say it. I also attribute my recent love of romance to this book. I read this book and I was like, I want to read more romance. And so I have been exploring a lot of romance more recently, and it is definitely due to The Beautiful Ones, which is why it had to be on my favorites list, because once I finished it, I couldn't stop thinking about it. To this day, I think about it probably once a day. So the gist of this book is that you have a main character, Nina, and she is coming of age to get married, and she is really close with her uncle, and her uncle is kind of the one who is like a father figure to her. And he basically tells her that instead of arranging a marriage for her, he's gonna allow her to explore her options and kind of marry somebody that she thinks she's really in love with. But her uncle's wife, Valerie, is like, no, I didn't get that. You're not getting that. And she is vengeful and she does not like Nina. She does not treat Nina well at all. So you already have that drama. But then Nina meets this guy named Hector, and it turns out that Hector and Valerie have a history. And when Valerie realizes that Hector is courting Nina, she loses her marbles. And it is so much drama. There is so much drama, and I ate it up. I loved it. I loved the atmosphere. This was one of the first times, not the first times, but I would say the most memorable time with Silvia Moreno-Garcia's characters where I was like, I'm very attached to these characters, and this is a new feeling for me, because I do think that her characters are a little bit forgettable for me, but I think about Nina all the time. I love Nina. And just the way that this had like a second chance romance aspect to it, I didn't know that I liked second chances, but I do. It was real cute. I really liked it. So the next book on this list is one that was also quite surprising, and that is These Violent Delights, not to be confused with These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is a dark academia. It is about 2 teenagers, Paul and Julian, and they have this really like toxic relationship with one another. It's very possessive, it's toxic, they're kind of abusive towards one another, it's codependent at times, but they think they're in love with each other. And so they have this really just bizarre relationship. And one day they decide that they're gonna kill somebody. So the prologue of this book is actually you seeing them kill the person that they've chosen to kill. And the rest of the book is the downward spiral of them getting to that point. So you already know what's happening in this book. You already know they did it. You already know how they did it, but you don't know the why. So this is a journey of the why. And I find that books like that really suck me in when you already know what's going on, but you don't know why. And you're just reading and reading and reading to figure out why they chose to do this. Why do they want to kill someone? And why do they need to do it together? And why did they do it the way that they did it? And why did they choose the person that they chose? And I think that the 70s being the time period this is set in was such an interesting choice as well, because it wasn't like they had easy access to technology and like answers about how to kill someone, but also their contact with each other is very tenuous because they can't just text each other all the time. So this whole story is actually told in the perspective of Paul, who entered into university at a very young age and ended up connecting with Julian because he was also younger among his college students, and they're both very smart. They're already both seemingly very isolated in the setting, so they come together. But because it's all told through Paul's perspective, you're only getting his feelings on it. You're only getting his feelings and ideas about what Julian thinks and who Julian is. And so I think that by the end, that aspect of it only being through Paul's perspective made for such a very interesting ending. And it made me think a lot about what transpired in this book. It made me think a lot about what I read and what was real and what wasn't real. So like, your boy Paul is very unreliable, but sometimes it's very hard to remember that when you're reading this book, in my opinion. It's hard to remember that this is only through Paul's perspective and we are only getting his feelings about this situation and about their relationship, and it's very toxic. So I don't know, I just had a really good time with this one, and I think about this one a lot. I read it probably in the middle of the year and I still think about it to this day. I also think what's interesting is that this is based off of a real case that happened in, I think it happened much earlier than the 70s, but I'll link it down below if I can remember. I can't even remember their names. I ended up researching it and like reading a bit about it, and it's definitely inspired by that. So I wouldn't read that first if you want to read this, because it may spoil some things, I guess. I don't know. I don't remember how in depth and similar they are, but you know, I'll link it down below if you're curious who it is, the case that it is. But I thought that was really cool to read after the fact as well. The next one on this list is This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno. And this is like a tech horror, but also turns into something completely different. I don't know, this is one of those books, again, that I feel is very weird and not for everybody. It does have a bit of an open ending, but one of the things I really enjoy about a horror book having an open ending is that you can go back and analyze so much of what's happening throughout this book that makes it less of an open ending sometimes. I feel like there are cases where an open ending feels really open and it feels unsatisfying when you first read it, but then when you go back and kind of analyze everything that happened in the book, the open ending isn't as open as you think it is. So in this book, Thiago and Vera are a married couple and they decide that they're gonna get one of those smart speakers, like a Google Home type thing. And once they set it up, they're like loving it, but it suddenly starts giving them really weird ads. And then it starts sending them packages that they didn't order. There's weird music that it'll play when they didn't ask them to. And so they're like, we probably need to get rid of this thing. But before that can happen, Vera ends up in a tragic accident and ends up dying. And so Thiago is like reflecting on these moments and these weird things that happened with this smart device. And he's like, is this the reason my wife got into this accident? And you start to realize that beyond this smart device, there is something evil following him and he's trying to figure it out, but also run away from it. I think the synopsis has a line in here that I really appreciate when describing this book. And it says, a startlingly, darkly funny horror novel about grief and rage, the loneliness of living between cultures, and the all too real oppressive intimacy of technology. And I definitely feel that way about this book. There's so much embedded in here that's beyond just the technology and this evil following him. There's a lot about his grief with his wife. There's a lot about his grief with living between two cultures and not feeling like he fits in one place. This was really well written. I was engrossed from the beginning. It's obviously very short, so it is fast, and in the middle there's this twist that like sucked me in even further, and it was the reason that I couldn't stop thinking about this book. And I feel like if I would have based my enjoyment of this book off the first half, I would have given it like a 3 stars, and then in the second half things take a turn and it was a 5-star experience, and it was bizarre and I loved it. I do want to say that there's animal death in here, so please be wary of that. I know that horror has a lot of triggers, but specifically there's an animal death that's very gruesome and you see it on page. And then you know this one had to make it to the list. It's The Weight of the Stars by Kay Ankrum. This made me sob. I happened to read this for an episode of Read It Down, which I will link below, and it unexpectedly was my favorite thing. And I just didn't know what to expect going into this, and what I got out of it was so much more than I could have expected or wanted. So this book follows Ryan Bird, who her biggest dream in life is to travel among the stars. She wants to be an astronaut, she wants to work for NASA, but the problem that she fears is she lives on the wrong side of the tracks. She is very poor, her family is no longer around son. And she is not only raising her younger brother, but helping him raise his son. So Ryan feels like her dreams are never going to be met. And then along comes this girl named Alexandria, and it turns out that Alexandria's mom is an astronaut who volunteered for a one-way trip to space to do exploration, knowing that she probably would never come back. And so Ryan and Alexandria end up having this really tenuous relationship. It's a real struggle in the beginning, but it turns out to be a really beautiful sapphic relationship. Like the most beautiful sapphic relationship I've probably ever read, and like the most meaningful. Maybe that's because it was one of the first times that I read a sapphic relationship that I was very, very involved in. But also the thing about this book that is so special is the found family in here, and like the representation in here of all types of people and experiences and things that they're dealing with. And I just loved this friend group because in some ways when you would look at them, it's like they don't fit together, but in reality they fit together perfectly and they love each other perfectly, but also messily. And it was just so beautiful. This is really not a sci-fi. This is really all about this found family, about this relationship, about Ryan trying to reach her dreams and also navigating life's circumstances that are often hard and derail you. And like, what do you do with those things? And the fact that all of these characters were pouring love into each other even when they didn't have a lot of love to give was just too much. It was too much for my little heart. And I think it came into my life at the perfect time, and it taught me so much about friendship and found family that I really aspire to have in my life. And I just loved all of these characters so much. Okay, so now we are getting into the top 7, which are in order, and the next book on the list is Kingdom of Copper. Are we surprised? I'm a second book lover, and so if you didn't know, the first book in this series is City of Brass, and this is the Daevabad trilogy. I read the whole trilogy earlier in the year and I loved it. City of Brass was I wouldn't say a rough start, but it definitely wasn't my favorite first book in a series. I think I gave it a generous 4 stars, but I wasn't sure. I was nervous. And then I read Kingdom of Copper, and this is a glowing 5 stars. I loved this installment. I just thought that this was the strongest installment within the trilogy just generally. I loved the trilogy as a whole, but this by far was the strongest installment. It's the one that I think about the most. It is when I really started to connect to certain characters and change my perspective on characters that I didn't previously like. And I think that really makes a book one of my favorites, is when an author can convince me of something in the beginning and then completely change my mind. There's just something about that that really gets me in a series. This definitely had the strongest world building, the strongest politic aspects. There were great twists. The one thing about Shannon that you gotta know though is she has a formula where the book is very slow for probably 75%, and then the 25% is where it gets explosive and things really go south really fast. I don't think any of the books were that different in that regard, but this installment was just like the perfect installment to this series and remains to be my favorite book in the series, and the reason that I overarchingly ended up loving this series so much. The only way I could describe this of how much I like this one over all of the other ones in the series is I could literally just reread this one and be fine. But I would reread the whole series, but I could reread just this one and be a-okay. Okay, so the next book on this list is my new obsession in life, and I really want to finish this series in 2023. So that might give you a hint, but it is Blood Solace by Vila Roth. This is a fantasy romance. Erin got me into this. The first one is called Blood Mercy, and the series itself is called the Blood Grace series. It's not completed, so I don't know how many books are actually going to be in the series, but this is the second one. Are you sensing a theme here? This is the second one. It was my favorite one. So like I said, it's a fantasy romance, and it follows our main character Cassie and Leo. And Leo is a Hesperine, which is a vampire race, very different than most vampire lore, which is what really sucked me into this series. And then Cassie is human, and they end up falling in love in the first book. And in the second book, you know, there's more world building, there's more politics, there's more angst, there's more slow burn, there's more pining. But this book is really special. I feel like this is gonna have a different tone than the majority of the books in this series, because the series makes you sweat. It puts you on edge. Like, these characters are constantly going through something difficult, politics-wise. Someone's trying to kill them, and like, they never have a good moment. And so I feel like this has a little bit of a different tone, because while the first half of this book is definitely like that, it's very tense. You're very on edge about what's gonna happen with these two two characters. The second half is a little sweeter. It's a little slower, it's a little sweeter. It's just a nice little moment that you have that you know isn't gonna last. You know it's not gonna last. So I think this is my favorite because there's a lot of sweetness in here. There's a lot of learning new things. There's a lot of adding on to this world that you didn't get to see in the first one and now you're getting to experience. But overall, I love this series because the character development is amazing. The slow burn, the pining, this relationship, I'm like rooting for it. I'm invested. I love it. But what really gets me is that, you know, I feel like with some fantasy romances, it's really not about the politics or the world building. Like it's fun to be in a fantasy setting, but that's not the main goal. It's the relationship. And in here, I feel like Vila Roth does an amazing job at balancing the world, politics, and this relationship in these characters. Not to mention the side characters. It's like a little found family. You know how I feel about found families. I just talked about how if I can get invested in side characters, you know I'm gonna love your book, okay? If I can get invested in all of your characters, you know I'm gonna love your book. Obviously, I'm a character-driven reader, but I love a good plot. And I feel like the combination of the politics and the world building in here really push the plot forward in more ways than just the romance, and it keeps you on edge and it keeps you reading because not only are you wanting the best for this relationship, you're also like really stressed out about what's happening in this world. And also like these two aren't supposed to be together. So that's, what is that called? Forbidden love? Romeo and Juliet? This next book, I'm actually surprised that it beat out so many of the books on my list, but I read this pretty early on in the year and like have not stopped thinking about it. I really wish I could have this reading experience for the first time all over again. Knowing what I know now, like how much I love it, I wish I could have this reading experience all over again. And this author is an auto-buy author, even though I just have only read one book by them, and I'm pretty sure it's their debut. And that's The Push by Ashley Audrain. I loved this book. It lives with me. I carry this book. It's so dramatic, but I do think about this like constantly. I think about this book constantly. I think about the ending constantly. My jaw was on the floor. I don't think this is a book that everyone will love. I don't think everyone will appreciate this book. I also think that if you're someone who doesn't like themes of motherhood explored or birth explored, this is probably not for you. But essentially this is about our main character Blythe, and she ends up in a relationship with a man who wants children, even though she has expressed time and time again that she doesn't want them. He kind of talks her into having a child. She has this child and has no connection to the child. And she's obviously really having a hard time with this in general because she's like, why don't I have a connection to my child? This just seems unnatural. So she thinks having a second child will maybe solve this issue. So she does, and she has a really great connection with her second child, but still struggles to connect with her first child. While we spend the majority of the time in Blythe's perspective, you also get Blythe's grandmother's perspective and Blythe's mother's perspective of them experiencing motherhood. And I thought that was an interesting aspect of it because you didn't know when you were reading this book if it was Blythe and the generational trauma that motherhood has inflicted on all of these women, or was there really something wrong with her child? Especially as someone who's not a mother, I enjoyed the discussions on motherhood because it was a very different perspective on motherhood than I normally see or hear in, you know, media mainly. So I just really appreciated what this book did, but also it just left me reeling by the end. Like my jaw was on the floor. I didn't expect what was coming, even though part of me did expect what was coming. I don't know. I just really enjoyed this. Okay, it's what you all have been waiting for. We all know the last three books are one author. One author only. The love of my life, the light of my reading year. Probably one of my, if not my favorite authors of all time. Olive knows, I know, do you know? It's Robin Hobb. We all know the last three are Robin Hobb. So with this, I have picked one book from every series that I've read so far of Robin Hobb's, and they are my favorite book of the series, and I put those in order. So the number one will be my favorite Robin Hobb of all time, my favorite book of the year. Anyway, let's just get into it. So number 3 on this list is Fool's Errand, which is the first book in the Tawny Man trilogy. And I think this one is the most surprising for me because I really thought that the third book in this trilogy was going to be the one that made it to the top 3. And actually it's the first one because this one has stuck with me. Just the emotional depth that you get from Fitz in here is just overwhelming, and I think about it all the time, and just some of the things that end up happening in this book like really broke me. And while the ending of this book also broke me, just something about this first book continues to haunt me. It haunts me because Robin Hobb haunts me with sadness and generally being horrible to her characters. But we love her for it, and we love Fitz, and so I had to put this at number 3 because it really did something to me emotionally, like truly put me in a funk, but also I really loved the depth of this book and the exploration of depression and loneliness and like just friendships and what those mean and life choices, and it just really got me. And this had to be number 3. And in the number 2 spot is Ship of Destiny, which is the third book in the Live Ship Trader trilogy. The Live Ship Trader trilogy is the second trilogy in the overarching realm of the Elderlings world. And in this world, you are following a whole set of new characters. So you're following the Vestrit family, and they are pretty broken up at this point because the patriarch of this family has died, their live ship has quickened, and basically things did not go the way that some of these characters thought they were gonna go. Like Althea thought she was gonna inherit the ship, and she does not. And so things get really messy. And on top of that, you have this man named Kenneth. He's a pirate king. He's trying to be a pirate king, and he wants a live ship. And so he is trying to go after a live ship, and it causes a lot of chaos in this community. And so in this town, which is called Bingtown, which is a trading community where the Vestrits, come from, things are changing. There are new trader families coming in, and so people are losing money because of these new traders and the way that they're changing the industry, basically the trading industry. And so there's a lot of politics, there's a lot of family drama, but at the end of the day, Robin Hobb is always about character work. And I think that is why Robin Hobb is often very boring for people, is because she very much focuses on character work and like real life dynamics and real life emotions that come with certain dynamics, like these messy families that are turning on each other and people using one another for their own gain. So like the politics and the world building, they are really well fleshed out, but they are not the most important part. I would say in the Live Ship Trader trilogy, it's a little bit different. The politics and world building are definitely more important in this trilogy, especially to understand the live ships and why they come alive. So it's a little bit different in this series. I see why people love this trilogy the most out of all of the books and this overarching like set of different series. I see why they love this one the most. It's definitely the most fast paced. It's in third person rather than first person, has multiple perspectives, has a lot going on. There's a little more focus on politics and world building than in the Farseer or the Tawny Man trilogy. So I see why people love this one the most. This was not my favorite trilogy of the series, but that's because I have a very special connection to Fitz and the Fool, which Fitz is the main character of the Farseer and the Tawny Man trilogy. Anyway, sorry, not to confuse anyone who doesn't know anything about this series, but it's all interconnected. So the interesting thing about this series is that while it is a bit more fast paced than I would say the Farseer or the Tawny Man trilogy, it's still slow. And this one has the best pacing out of all 3 of the books in the series. I wasn't sure if this would make it onto my favorites list because there is a sexual assault scene in here that really triggered me. But this is the one that had so much in here that I wanted. Like I got the answers that I wanted. I got more insight into certain characters that I was really attached to. I did get some endings that I really appreciated and I really was looking forward to and hoping for. I think that you just get so much from this book. On top of the pacing being really great, the world building being really great, there's just a lot to love about this book. At the end of the day, this is the one that sticks in my head the most. This is the one that I definitely enjoyed the most. I really enjoyed the first one and the last one, but I by far liked this one even more than the first one. And it solidified that I can really love a pirate book because this definitely has like a piratey nautical theme to it. And I just really, really enjoyed that atmosphere. Like Robin Hobb did it so well. Also dragons in here. There's dragons in here. Need I say more? Actually, probably, because I have talked about how dragons are not always well done in dragon books that are recommended to me. And I think the dragons are very well done in here. Although I don't know how I feel about a talking dragon. I will say that. I don't know how I feel about it, which is why I've been slow to get into the Rain Wild Chronicles, because the dragons are very involved in it and they talk. I don't know how I feel about that. It didn't bother me that much in here. But I also kind of checked out whenever those chapters happened where we were getting the dragons and the serpents talking. So take that how you will. So then lastly, my favorite book of the year, the one that just really, it solidified my love for this world. It solidified my love for Robin Hobb, and that is Royal Assassin, which is the second book in the Farseer trilogy, which is the first trilogy that kicks off this entire realm of the Elderlings. This trilogy is where you meet Fitz, and Fitz is the bastard to the king-in-waiting, Chivalry. And when he finds out about Fitz, he abdicates the throne and is left to be raised by the stable master Burge, and Burge takes on this responsibility because he was very close friends with Chivalry, almost like brothers. And the king, which is Chivalry's dad, realizes that they don't know what to do with Fitz. They don't know how they're going to go about the situation. So rather wait till he's older and potentially tries to take the throne for himself, they want to make use of him. So they make him the Royal Assassin. And so in the first book, he is a little boy. He goes through a lot of training to be an assassin. He makes a lot of different relationships in his life. And in this book, he's a bit older and you really get to see him grow up in here. I think in this book, you gain such a close connection to Fitz and like his growing pains, but not only his growing pains just as a teenager in general, but also his growing pains in the sense that he just doesn't know who to trust. He doesn't know who really loves him. And he struggles with believing that he has a purpose in life and that he is actually wanted and loved. It's a little bit more emotional because of the fact that I think Fitz just as a teenager is a bit more emotional. He's just a very emotional man in general. And it's hard because a lot of the people have at times the best of intentions with Fitz, but they also are fighting against stereotypes when it comes to bastards and how they're treating him as if he is the reason he was born. Like he was the one who forced his dad to do what he did. So it is an interesting fight against people wanting to love him and fighting against societal standards and beliefs that they've carried for so long. But also you're just getting a lot of emotional depth from Fitz, and he's falling in love for the first time and he doesn't know what to do with that because he hasn't really had the greatest examples of love in his life. And I just think this is a perfect example of following a character from like being young to teens to early 20s where like he is imperfect. He is always making mistakes and he's fumbling and he's learning about how to just be a decent person, especially in this world. But on top of all of that, on top of all the characters and character dynamics that you get, you also get a lot of great world building in here. So there's hints at certain things happening in the first book. And in this book, you get a more fleshed out idea of this war that's kind of looming in the background, why it's happening, what needs to be done about it, and how Fitz is involved in that. And then you also have these sneaky politics taking place on the side that has to do with the throne. Further, you're getting to learn a lot about the two magic systems that are in here. There's the wit, which is a magic that has to do with animals, and then there is skilling, which is basically being able to enter in somebody's brain and like hear their thoughts. It's interesting to be able to learn about both of those, but the skill is more talked about in this series, whereas in the Tawny Man trilogy, the wit is more focused on. But you just get a lot more in this book. And it also proved to me about how second books are superior. And I absolutely loved this. I really love the Farseer trilogy. Overall, it is a trilogy that made me fall in love with Robin Hobb's writing, her characters, and this world. And there's no turning back now because I'm almost done. So that was my 10 best of 2022. I don't know if any of that was surprising to you. I'm sure the Robin Hobb was not surprising, but maybe the ones that I chose was surprising. I don't really know. But let me know down below if you guessed any of these. Also, let me know down below some of your favorite books of 2022, and I will talk to you next time.